The restaurant was alive that night, the kind of night that made even the air feel rich. Laughter echoed from every corner, glasses clinked like tiny bells, and the aroma of sizzling steak and garlic butter drifted through the air like a promise of something wonderful. Soft jazz poured from hidden speakers, the smooth rhythm mixing with the murmur of conversations. It wasn't just dinner, it was a performance, one where people played roles they wished were real. The men sat straighter when the waiters passed, adjusting their cufflinks and talking loudly about business deals. The women leaned in with soft laughter, diamonds glimmering under the chandeliers that hung like captured stars. It was the kind of place where everybody pretended to be someone bigger, someone more important than they really were. At the center of it all, near the wide glass windows that overlooked the city skyline, sat Jonathan Pierce. His presence didn't just command attention, it demanded it. The sharp navy blue suit he wore looked custom-made, tailored perfectly to his broad frame. A gold watch peeked from his wrist, catching the light every time he moved his hand. He wasn't the type to blend in, he was the type who made sure everyone saw him. The waiters knew his face, and the arrogance that came with it. Jonathan Pierce was a millionaire, self-made, and proud of it. He loved to tell the story, how he came from nothing, how hard work and a bit of luck turned him into a man who could buy anything he wanted. But what he really loved most was reminding everyone around him that they couldn't. He leaned back in his chair, one arm draped lazily over it, his voice booming above the smooth jazz as he told another story about how he closed a $10 million deal in a single phone call. His friends, men just like him, with expensive suits and cheap laughter, nodded and chuckled, though half of them had heard the same story a dozen times before. Still, nobody dared interrupt him. That was Jonathan's world, loud, polished, and untouchable. The restaurant was his stage, and he was the star every night he walked in. Across the room, Aaliyah moved like calm water in a storm. She balanced 3 heavy plates on one arm, the movement so smooth it almost looked like a dance. Her dark curls were tied neatly at the back, a few soft strands framing her gentle face. Her uniform was simple, crisp white shirt tucked into a black apron, sleeves rolled just enough to show her steady hands. There was something about her, something the regulars noticed but never said out loud. Maybe it was the quiet strength in her posture, or the warmth in her smile that felt real in a place full of fake ones. She didn't rush like the others. She didn't force smiles. She just moved with grace, a quiet grace that made her stand out more than she realized. For Aaliyah, this job wasn't just about serving food. It was survival, but also something deeper. She loved watching people, learning from how they spoke, how they carried themselves, how kindness or cruelty showed up in their smallest gestures. Every night, she learned something new about the world, and sometimes, about herself. The staff admired her. The manager trusted her. But the customers, especially the rich ones, often underestimated her. To them, she was just a waitress. A background character in their expensive night out. Yet, if anyone had looked closer, they would have seen the quiet intelligence in her eyes, the calm confidence behind her smile. Aaliyah was far more than she appeared to be. That night, though, the universe seemed to have something planned, a strange meeting between arrogance and grace. As Aaliyah crossed the dining floor, her footsteps light against the marble, she caught Jonathan's voice again. He was louder now, bragging about his travels to China, laughing about how nobody could understand him there, but money talks everywhere. His friends roared with laughter, the sound cutting across the room like glass. Aaliyah placed the plates down gently on a nearby table, but her eyes flickered toward him, just for a second. Jonathan noticed. He didn't like not being the center of attention. His smirk widened. He raised his glass, glanced at his friends, and nodded toward her. "Watch this," he said under his breath. He was about to make her part of his entertainment, another casual show of power, the kind that made him feel bigger at the expense of someone else. Aaliyah approached their table, still wearing that soft, professional smile. Her voice was gentle when she spoke. Good evening, gentlemen. Can I get you anything else? Her tone was respectful, her posture perfect. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, eyes glinting with mischief. Actually, sweetheart, he said, I've got a question for you. His voice carried just enough volume to make nearby tables turn their heads. He wanted an audience. He always did. Aaliyah stood still, polite as ever. Yes, sir, she replied. Jonathan smirked and tilted his head. You look smart, real sharp. Tell me, can you speak Chinese? The table erupted in quiet laughter. Aaliyah blinked, unsure what he meant. Chinese, sir, she asked, her tone still calm. Jonathan grinned wider, tapping his glass on the table. Yeah. I'll tell you what, I'll give you $100,000 if you can say something in Chinese right now. The laughter grew louder. People began to glance over. Even the pianist at the corner slowed his tune. The moment hung in the air, sharp, heavy, and cruel. And Aaliyah knew, her smile was about to be tested. Jonathan waved her over with a sharp snap of his fingers, the sound slicing through the restaurant's soft jazz like a whip. Heads turned, eyes shifting toward the corner where he sat with his entourage. He didn't even look up at her as she approached, just twirled his glass of wine lazily, the ruby liquid swirling like arrogance in motion. When Aaliyah reached his table, she offered her practiced, polite smile, the one she had perfected over years of dealing with people who mistook manners for weakness. Good evening, sir, she said, her voice steady and kind. Can I get you anything else? Jonathan leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, his expensive watch catching the light like it wanted to be noticed. Hey, sweetheart, he began, the word rolling off his tongue with the kind of casual disrespect that made Aaliyah's skin prickle. You look smart, but tell me something. He paused, letting the room's curiosity gather. His friends were already grinning, sensing that familiar tone of his, the one that meant he was about to put someone on the spot. Then, with a smirk that could freeze warmth out of the air, he said, Can you speak Chinese? Aaliyah blinked, taken aback. It wasn't the question itself, it was the way he said it. Mocking, teasing, dripping with condescension. Chinese, sir, she asked, her voice still polite, though her heart gave a small jolt of disbelief. What kind of question was that, and why here, in front of everyone? Jonathan chuckled, looking around the table. His friends were already laughing, the kind of laughter that came not from humor but from cruelty. Yeah, he said. You look like one of those overachievers. Tell you what, I'll give you $100,000 if you can say something in Chinese right now. The table erupted in laughter. The sound was sharp, ugly, the kind of laughter that made people look. Within seconds, nearby diners turned their heads. Some whispered, some smiled nervously, unsure what was happening but curious enough to watch. To them, it was just a rich man playing a game. But to Aaliyah, it was something deeper, a humiliation disguised as a joke. Her hands tightened slightly on her serving tray. She could feel the warmth rising up her neck, a mixture of embarrassment and anger, but she didn't let it show. Her years of customer service had taught her how to wear calm like armor. Inside, her mind raced. She had met people like Jonathan before, men who thought money could buy amusement, men who measured worth in dollars and status instead of decency. But never had one dared to challenge her this way, in front of a whole restaurant. Sir, she said softly, her voice so composed it almost startled him. Are you sure you want me to? The laughter paused for just a heartbeat. Jonathan blinked, caught off guard by her response. Then, realizing the crowd was still watching, he laughed again, louder this time, his confidence swelling like a balloon. Oh, please, he scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Just humor us. We could use some entertainment. His words stung more than he knew. Around them, some guests shifted uncomfortably. A woman at a nearby table frowned, whispering to her husband, "That's not funny." But Jonathan didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. He was lost in his own arrogance, convinced that the world was his stage and everyone else was a supporting character. Aaliyah stood silently for a moment. Inside her chest, her heart beat faster, but not from fear. From clarity. She looked at him, really looked at him, the man who thought a suit and a watch made him untouchable. She could have walked away, ignored him, reported him to the manager. But something in her, something fierce and dignified, decided otherwise. Her eyes softened. She placed the tray gently on the edge of their table, the silverware clinking faintly as it touched the surface. Then she straightened her shoulders, her expression calm and unreadable. If Jonathan wanted entertainment, he was about to get it, just not the kind he expected. One of his friends leaned in, smirking. "Come on, sweetheart," he said mockingly. "Say something Chinese. Maybe you'll win the jackpot." More laughter. More sneers. Even Jonathan's laughter had an edge of impatience now, as though he'd already decided she couldn't possibly respond. But Aaliyah's silence began to unsettle them. The longer she stood there, still and steady, the more uncomfortable the table grew. Her calmness was unnerving, her lack of reaction almost regal. The room's energy shifted slightly, like the moment before a storm. Jonathan leaned forward again, smirk fading just a bit. "Well?" he asked, his tone sharper. "Don't tell me you're speechless now." Aaliyah met his gaze, her dark eyes unwavering. "No, sir," she said quietly. "I was just deciding which language you'd like to hear first." For a second, the table went silent. Jonathan blinked, his smirk faltering. His friends exchanged glances. And somewhere across the restaurant, the jazz music seemed to fade into the background. The air grew heavier, thick with curiosity and disbelief. Aaliyah's words hung there, poised like the first drop of rain before thunder follows. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't snapped or shouted. But the calm confidence in her tone said everything. Jonathan shifted in his seat, suddenly aware that whatever was about to happen next, might not be the show he thought he was starring in. Aaliyah took a slow, steady breath and placed her tray gently on the corner of the table. The silverware rattled slightly, but her hands didn't tremble. Something had shifted in the air, an invisible current running through the restaurant, quieting the chatter and laughter. Even the jazz music seemed to soften as if the world itself had leaned in to listen. Jonathan leaned back, smirking, confident he'd already won. His friends waited, half laughing, half curious, their eyes fixed on the young waitress they assumed would mumble a word or two before walking away in embarrassment. But Aaliyah stood tall, her eyes steady, her calm presence suddenly commanding the entire room. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm, carrying a kind of elegance that made people instinctively listen. The words came out clear, melodic, and precise, fluent Mandarin, the kind spoken only by those who truly understood its rhythm. Her tone was rich, her pronunciation flawless. Every syllable landed like a note in a beautiful song. The words glided across the room, graceful yet sharp as silk cutting through arrogance. For a moment, nobody moved. Jonathan blinked, confused, his smirk faltering as he turned to his friends. What did she just say?" he asked, his voice smaller than before. But none of them answered. They just stared, wide-eyed, unsure whether to laugh or applaud. Aaliyah's expression didn't change. She gave a polite, almost teacher-like nod and continued, seamlessly, smoothly, her next words flowing out in perfect French. "Le respect est une richesse que l'argent ne peut pas acquérir." The vowels danced from her lips effortlessly. Her accent carried the grace of Parisian streets, smooth and light, each word pronounced with poetic precision. A couple seated nearby, clearly French, gasped quietly, one whispering to the other, "C'est parfait." Before anyone could even process it, she switched again, this time into Spanish, her voice carrying warmth and rhythm. "El respeto vale más que el dinero." A few diners at a corner table clapped under their breath, smiling in disbelief. Then she moved on to Arabic, her tone deepening, flowing like a prayer. The sound echoed with power. The way she rolled each word, strong yet respectful, made even the room's silence feel reverent. People were no longer eating, they were watching, listening, mesmerized. And she wasn't done. Without hesitation, she slipped into Italian, her voice bright and lyrical. Il rispetto vale più dei soldi. Then German, crisp and commanding. Respect ist mehr wert als Geld. Then Japanese, delicate yet firm. Finally, she ended in Swahili, her tone proud and steady. Heshima ni bora kuliko pesa. Each language came with a new rhythm, a new emotion, like a symphony of cultures woven together by one voice. Aaliyah didn't rush. She let every phrase breathe, giving the words time to sink in. With each transition, the weight in the air grew heavier, the realization spreading across every face, this wasn't just a display of intelligence. This was a statement. When she finally stopped, the silence that followed was absolute. Even the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed to have vanished. The once boisterous restaurant now felt like a cathedral, everyone holding their breath. Aaliyah stood still for a moment, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her expression calm. Then she looked directly at Jonathan and spoke again, this time in English, her voice gentle but filled with quiet power. That means, she said slowly, respect is worth more than money. The word struck like thunder wrapped in silk. They didn't need volume, they carried weight on their own. Jonathan's eyes darted around, searching for a trace of laughter or support, but all he found were stunned faces. His friends, who had been laughing moments ago, now sat frozen, their smiles gone. The arrogance on his face melted into disbelief, and something deeper. Shame. Aaliyah gave a small, courteous smile, the same polite smile she had worn when she first approached, but now it felt entirely different. It wasn't the smile of a server. It was the smile of someone who had just reclaimed her dignity in the most elegant way possible. The room began to stir again, first with soft murmurs, then a few claps, hesitant at first, then stronger. Within seconds, applause filled the air, rolling through the restaurant like a wave. Guests stood from their tables, some smiling, some shaking their heads in awe. Even the chef peeked from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, whispering, "My God, she's incredible." Jonathan didn't move. His glass of wine sat untouched, the ice in his whiskey melting slowly. The man who had tried to buy entertainment had just been taught a priceless lesson, one he would never forget. Aaliyah bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement of the applause, her smile warm but humble. She didn't gloat. She didn't mock. She simply picked up her tray again, standing tall, radiating quiet confidence as she turned to leave. And as she walked away, every eye in the room followed her, not because she was a waitress anymore, but because she had become something far greater. She was the reminder that grace, intelligence, and respect can silence arrogance in any language. Burning shade of a man who had just been stripped of his pride in front of a room full of strangers. His smirk was gone, replaced by a blank stare, his lips slightly parted as if he wanted to speak but didn't know what to say. The laughter that had filled his table moments ago had vanished completely. His friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting between him and Aaliyah, unsure whether to say something or stay silent. The millionaire who once filled every room with noise now sat in a silence that seemed louder than anything he'd ever heard. The restaurant was still buzzing, but in a different way now. The guests whispered quietly, not in mockery, but in awe. What they had just witnessed wasn't a scene of humiliation, it was a scene of grace. The same waitress they had barely noticed when they walked in had turned into the center of the universe. The same man who once believed money could buy entertainment had been taught, in front of everyone, that some things simply couldn't be bought at all. Jonathan's hand trembled slightly as he set down his glass. He swallowed hard, staring at the young woman standing before him. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't defensive. He was humbled. The weight of his own arrogance sat heavy in his chest. Across the room, the restaurant manager stood near the bar, trying to hide a proud grin. Even the chef peered out from the kitchen window, whispering something to the bartender. That girl just taught the boss of the world a lesson. Soft applause began somewhere near the back, hesitant at first, but it spread quickly, table to table, guest to guest. The sound grew warmer, richer, genuine. For once, it wasn't the kind of applause given to a performer. It was respect. Pure, heartfelt respect. Aaliyah stood quietly through it, her eyes lowered, a faint smile playing on her lips. She wasn't gloating or seeking praise. In fact, she seemed almost shy about it, like she hadn't done anything special at all. When the applause began to fade, she nodded politely to the guests, picked up her tray, and turned to walk back toward the kitchen, ready to continue her shift as if nothing extraordinary had just taken place. But then came a voice, softer than before, no trace of mockery in it. "Wait." Aaliyah paused mid-step and turned around slowly. Jonathan was still seated, but his posture had changed completely. The confident lean, the casual arrogance, all gone. He now sat straight, both hands resting on the table, his expression serious and almost vulnerable. His voice was quieter, stripped of its earlier pride. "Where did you learn all that?" he asked. The question came out not as a challenge but as genuine curiosity, maybe even admiration. Aaliyah studied him for a moment before answering. Her tone remained calm, but her eyes softened with warmth. "From life, sir," she said simply. Jonathan blinked, a little taken aback by her answer. "Life?" he echoed. She nodded gently. "Yes. My parents were diplomats. We moved every few years, new countries, new languages, new people. I learned because I wanted to connect with others, to understand them. Every language I learned wasn't for show, it was a bridge." Her voice carried across the room softly, yet everyone heard it. There was something about her calmness that commanded quiet. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table. He was listening now, really listening, something he wasn't used to doing. Aaliyah continued, "When I was little, I used to think people who spoke many languages were the richest in the world. They could walk into any place, talk to anyone, and be understood. But over time, I realized something." She paused, her expression thoughtful. "The richest people I ever met weren't the ones with money or power. They were the ones who treated others with respect, no matter where they came from or how they looked." Her words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just her tone, it was the truth behind it. He looked down at his hands, noticing how tightly he'd been gripping his napkin. For years, he had measured his worth by his bank account, his watch, his car, but none of those things could buy the kind of grace and wisdom standing before him now. A hush fell again, but this time it was peaceful. Even Jonathan's friends, the ones who had laughed the loudest, looked ashamed of themselves. One of them muttered, "She's right," under his breath. Jonathan exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders. "You're remarkable," he said quietly, his tone genuine. "I shouldn't have spoken to you that way." Aaliyah gave a small smile, her eyes kind. "It's all right, sir. We all learn lessons, some just cost more than others." That made him chuckle softly, a sad, humbled laugh, the kind that comes when a man realizes he's been wrong for too long. As Aaliyah turned to walk away once more, Jonathan watched her go, his gaze heavy with thought. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about deals, profits, or money. He was thinking about the power of respect, and how a single moment of humility could be worth more than all the wealth he'd ever earned. He didn't know it yet, but that night, that single, unexpected encounter, would change him forever. The applause grew louder now, swelling through the restaurant like a rising wave. What started as a few claps from the back soon turned into a full standing ovation. Chairs slid back, napkins fell forgotten onto tables, and every guest, from the quiet couple in the corner to the executives by the window, was on their feet. Some clapped with wide smiles, others with tears glistening in their eyes. The room that once buzzed with laughter and luxury now pulsed with something far more powerful: respect. Aaliyah stood still in the middle of it all, her chest rising and falling calmly. Her eyes shimmered under the soft golden light of the chandeliers, but her expression remained humble. She wasn't soaking in the attention, she was simply letting the moment breathe. When the clapping began to fade, she gave a small nod of gratitude and turned back toward Jonathan's table. Jonathan, once the loudest man in the room, was utterly silent. The smirk, the arrogance, the glint of superiority, all gone. He looked up at her, eyes wide, struggling to form words that might undo his earlier behavior. His hand instinctively reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a sleek black wallet. He flipped it open, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached for a thick wad of crisp bills. "Here," he said softly, voice low. "For the lesson. Or maybe, as an apology." But before he could hand it over, Aaliyah raised a hand gently, shaking her head. "Keep your money," she said, her tone calm but firm. "I just wanted you to understand what true wealth sounds like." The words landed like thunder in the silence that followed. Her voice wasn't angry, it was steady, wise, and impossibly dignified. Jonathan froze, the bills still in his hand. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he lowered his arm and placed the wallet back onto the table. Around him, no one moved or spoke. Every eye in the room stayed fixed on Aaliyah. Then she turned. Her movements were slow, deliberate, the kind of poise that couldn't be bought or taught. Her posture straight, her shoulders relaxed, she picked up her tray and began walking toward the kitchen. The soft click of her shoes echoed across the polished floor as she disappeared through the swinging doors. The applause rose again, this time not for the shock of the moment, but for the quiet strength she carried with her. Jonathan remained seated, staring at the spot where she had stood just moments ago. He wasn't used to silence. Silence meant discomfort, reflection, and those were two things he'd spent his whole life avoiding. But now, he didn't move. His untouched wine glass trembled slightly in his hand, the deep red liquid rippling like his thoughts. The people at his table shifted awkwardly. No one dared to joke or whisper. The fun was over. The air had changed. Jonathan exhaled, his jaw tightening. He looked around the restaurant, at the servers moving gracefully between tables, at the smiling couples, at the warm light reflecting off polished glasses, and for the first time, he realized how small his own actions had been. For years, he had measured worth by numbers, profit margins, stock prices, luxury cars. He thought success was loud, glittering, and measurable. But what Aaliyah had shown him was something quieter, deeper, a kind of wealth that came from dignity, respect, and authenticity. He sat there for a long time, lost in thought. The laughter and music gradually returned around him, but he wasn't part of it anymore. His friends excused themselves one by one, embarrassed, leaving him alone at the table. When he finally stood, the restaurant had nearly emptied. The staff was resetting tables, wiping glasses, dimming lights. Jonathan walked slowly toward the exit, each step heavier than the last. At the hostess stand, a young woman looked up with a polite smile. "Did you enjoy your meal, sir?" she asked. Jonathan paused, his gaze distant, almost thoughtful. "I did," he said after a moment. "But not for the reason you think." The hostess tilted her head slightly. "Is everything all right?" He nodded, then hesitated. "Could you tell me the full name of your waitress, Aaliyah?" The hostess blinked in surprise. "Why?" she asked carefully. Jonathan looked down at the counter, then up again, a faint smile crossing his face, the kind of smile that carried gratitude rather than pride. "Because," he said quietly, "I think she just reminded me what real class looks like." The hostess's expression softened. "She'll be happy to hear that, sir." He nodded, but his eyes were distant, full of reflection. "No," he said softly. "She doesn't need to hear it. I do." He turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing through the empty restaurant. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement, reflecting his figure as he stepped into the night. For a long moment, he stood under the awning, staring out at the passing cars and the quiet hum of the street. Then, he reached into his wallet again, not for cash, but for a small notepad he always carried for business ideas. He tore out a page and scribbled something on it. As he walked to his car, he folded the note and placed it in his jacket pocket, a reminder of a woman who taught him that class isn't about what you wear, own, or spend. It's about how you make others feel. That night, Jonathan didn't go home to his penthouse or his luxury wine. He drove through the quiet streets, replaying Aaliyah's words in his mind, "True wealth isn't money. It's respect." And for the first time in years, he felt something rare, peace. The next morning, sunlight poured gently through the restaurant's tall glass windows, painting golden stripes across the polished wooden floor. The air smelled of fresh coffee and lemon polish as the staff prepared for another busy day. Aaliyah walked in, tying her apron around her waist, her expression calm and focused as always. To her, last night already felt like a dream, surreal, distant, and unforgettable. She wasn't the type to brag or dwell on moments of attention, she preferred quiet dignity. But little did she know, something extraordinary awaited her. She blinked in surprise and wiped her hands on her apron before taking it. Her name, Aaliyah Johnson, was written neatly in bold cursive across the front. The handwriting was elegant, practiced, and unfamiliar. Her heart beat a little faster as she carefully opened the envelope. Inside, she found a single folded sheet of paper and what looked like a check. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the letter. The words were handwritten in dark blue ink. "For the woman who taught me the language of respect, Jonathan Pierce." Beneath the note was the check, but it wasn't for $100,000 in cash. It was something infinitely more meaningful, a full scholarship to the International School of Linguistics in Geneva, Switzerland, the very program Aaliyah had once told her coworkers she dreamed of joining years ago, back when dreams felt too far to reach. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her breath caught in her throat as she reread the letter, her mind racing to make sense of it. The restaurant sounds, clinking plates, chatter, coffee brewing, all faded into a blur. She whispered his name under her breath, Jonathan Pierce. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. The same man who had mocked her just the night before had turned around and done something profoundly human. It wasn't about money anymore, it was about acknowledgement, redemption, and respect. Mr. Thompson leaned in, curious but gentle. "Is it good news?" Aaliyah nodded slowly, still staring at the letter. "It's more than I ever imagined." For the rest of the day, she worked quietly, her mind floating somewhere between disbelief and joy. Every now and then, she caught her reflection in the restaurant's mirrors and smiled to herself. The girl who once served tables was now stepping into a future she thought she could never afford. Word spread quickly among the staff. Some were amazed, some tearful, others simply proud. They had witnessed the humiliation, the power of her poise, and now, the beautiful twist that followed. By evening, when the dinner crowd began to trickle in, Aaliyah's story had already become something of a legend in town. People whispered about the waitress who spoke 9 languages and changed a millionaire's heart. The video footage from a diner's phone had quietly made its way onto social media, where it spread like wildfire. Millions watched in awe as Aaliyah spoke fluently in language after language, her calm composure shining through, but for Aaliyah, the views and fame didn't matter. What mattered was the truth of that moment, the lesson that echoed through every word she spoke that night: respect is worth more than money. Later that evening, as she left the restaurant, she paused at the door and looked back one last time. The golden light inside reflected off the glass, reminding her of how far she had come, from a girl who balanced plates and smiles, to a woman who inspired change with her voice. Outside, the air was cool and soft. She stood on the sidewalk for a while, watching the city lights flicker across the horizon. Pulling out the letter once more, she traced Jonathan's signature with her finger. It wasn't just ink on paper, it was proof that people could change, that even the proudest hearts could learn humility when shown grace instead of anger. She smiled to herself and whispered, "Thank you." Months later, she boarded a plane to Switzerland, clutching her acceptance letter and that same handwritten note. When the plane lifted off, she looked out the window, the clouds glowing orange beneath the sunrise. Her reflection in the glass looked peaceful, confident, and free. Back in the city, Jonathan Pierce attended a charity gala. For the first time, he didn't brag about profits or deals. Instead, when asked what inspired him lately, he simply smiled and said, "A waitress once taught me that some riches can't be spent, only earned." The story of that night never faded. People retold it in cafes, classrooms, and boardrooms. It became a quiet reminder that behind every uniform, every tired smile, and every unnoticed act of kindness, there might be someone extraordinary. And somewhere in Geneva, in a lecture hall filled with students from around the world, Aaliyah stood at the front of the class, introducing herself, this time not as a waitress, but as a linguist, teacher, and inspiration. Her voice carried across the room, calm and sure, in perfect French, "Le respect est une richesse que l'argent ne peut pas acquérir." Respect is a wealth money cannot buy. And as her students listened in awe, the legend of the black waitress who spoke 9 languages, and taught a millionaire the true meaning of wealth, lived on.